The world ended not with a bang, but with the scent of nothing at all. They call me the alchemist of Paris. They say Camille Vane can distill the soul of a summer night into a crystal flacon. They say my nose is insured for millions, because I can detect a single jasmine petal in a field of 1,000 roses. But they are looking at a ghost. I am a predator who has lost her sight. I am a musician who has gone deaf. For 365 days, I have lived in a world made of cardboard. I eat food that tastes like ash. I walk through flower markets that smell of sterile plastic. I stand in my atelier on the Place Vendôme, surrounded by 1,000 glass vials. This room used to be a symphony. Now, it is a graveyard. I pick up a bottle of Bulgarian Rose Otto. I know its price. I know its molecular weight. I know its chemical signature. But as I bring the glass to my nose, there is only the terrifying, hollow void of cold air. My mind searches for the memory, the honeyed, deep, velvety crimson. But the memory is fading, like an old photograph left in the sun. I am Camille Vane, the heiress to an empire of air, and I am a fraud. The board of directors is waiting. The Winter's Breath collection is due in 30 days. If they find out that the great Camille is anosmic, that I am broken, the stocks will plunge, and the Vane name will vanish. I look at my reflection in the polished silver of the laboratory table. I look perfect. My white silk suit is uncreased. My platinum hair is a sharp, geometric line. My eyes are the color of a frozen lake. I look like power, but inside, I am screaming into a vacuum. I need to breathe. I need to escape the scentless walls of my own perfection. The rain began as I reached the Le Marais district. It wasn't a gentle Parisian mist. It was a cold, violent downpour that turned the cobblestones into mirrors of oil and light. I didn't have an umbrella. I didn't care. I let the water ruin my silk. I let the cold bite at my skin. At least the cold was a sensation. At least the shivering told me I was still alive. I took cover under a dark green canvas awning. My breath hitched. I was standing at the edge of a flower stall, but it wasn't a boutique. It was a chaotic jungle. Buckets of muddy water, tangled vines of ivy, crates of earth-stained herbs. And there, in the center of the mess, was a girl who looked like she was made of the very soil I had spent my life trying to refine. She was laughing. Why was she laughing? She was drenched. Her copper curls were matted to her forehead, and her denim overalls were caked with wet peat. Her face was a map of orange freckles, hundreds of them, as if someone had flicked a paintbrush of gold across her skin. A customer stood before her, holding a wilted bouquet of dark, bruised lilies. I watched, hidden in the shadows of the awning, as the girl took the customer's hand. "They look dead," the customer grumbled. "They don't smell like anything." The girl, Sophie, as the wooden sign above her head suggested, smiled. It was a soft, dangerous smile. She leaned into the lilies, closing her eyes. "You're looking with your nose," Sophie whispered. Her voice was low, vibrating through the sound of the rain. "Don't just sniff. Listen, these aren't just lilies. This is the smell of a secret kept too long in a damp basement. It's the scent of a heavy velvet curtain in an empty theater. It's the bitterness of a goodbye, but with a tiny, sharp spark of ginger at the end, like a promise that you'll forget the pain by morning." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't just describe a scent. She painted a world. She took the void in my head and filled it with texture, with color, with a narrative. The customer walked away, looking at the lilies as if they were made of diamonds. Sophie turned back to her crates, wiping her muddy hands on her thighs. She looked up and saw me, the ice-white apparition in ruined silk, staring at her like a starving woman at a feast. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her green eyes bright with curiosity. "I haven't seen one," I replied, my voice cracking. I am one. I walked toward her, stepping into the mud of her stall. I didn't care about my shoes. I didn't care about the cameras that might be watching. I reached out and grabbed her wrist. Her skin was warm. It smelled of earth and rain and life, or so my mind told me, desperately trying to fill in the blanks. I need your eyes, I said, my grip tightening. I need your words. I need you to be my ghostwriter, but for the air. She didn't pull away. She looked at my expensive watch, then at my frozen blue eyes. She didn't see the heiress. She saw the vacuum. You can't smell them, can you? She whispered. The truth felt like a blade in my throat. I couldn't speak. I simply bowed my head. I can show you, Sophie said, her voice softening, but it won't be clean. My world isn't made of glass bottles and laboratory filters, Camille. My world is made of rot and growth, and the smell of a dog's fur after it's been running through a forest. If you want to find your nose again, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty. I looked at her ink-stained, earth-crusted fingers. Then I looked at my own pale, sterile palms. Start now, I commanded, a spark of my old authority returning. The rain. The street. Tell me what it is. Sophie closed her eyes, tilting her head back to catch the raindrops. It's not just water, she murmured. It's the smell of the sky's exhaustion. It's the scent of iron railings being scrubbed clean, mixed with the dusty memory of the heat that was on the stones an hour ago. It's ozone, sharp and electric, like the feeling in your chest, right before you tell a lie you know you'll never take back. I felt it. For the first time in a year, the gray walls of my mind flickered with a flash of electric blue. Again, I whispered. Do it again. The transition was a collision of two universes. Sophie arrived at my atelier the next morning like a forest fire in a laboratory. She stood in my sterile, white-on-white workspace, wearing a faded t-shirt and dirt-streaked overalls. She held a brown paper bag leaking moisture onto my polished marble floors. I watched her from behind my glass desk, my fingers laced tightly. This was my sanctuary, a place where I was untouchable. And here she was, dripping rainwater and smelling of wet wool and wild optimism. It's too quiet in here, Sophie said, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. It feels like a hospital for things that aren't allowed to die. Precision requires silence, I snapped, though my voice felt brittle. We work with essences that cost more than your neighborhood. Precision is boring, Camille. Life is messy. That's why it has a scent. She walked toward me and dumped the bag's contents onto my desk. Damp moss, crushed eucalyptus, and a chunk of gray driftwood. Tell me what you see. I see a mess, I replied. Look closer. Stop being a CEO for 5 seconds. Describe it. I leaned in. The moss was a deep emerald, thick and spongy. The driftwood was etched with jagged lines like ancient skin. It looks ancient, like it's been fighting the ocean for a century. Sophie smiled. Good. Now listen. That wood, it doesn't just smell like salt. It smells like the exhaustion of a long journey. It's the scent of sun-bleached bone and a storm that has run out of wind. And the moss? It's the smell of a damp basement where a child is hiding. It's cool, heavy and green, like the silence between two people who are about to kiss, but are too afraid to start. I closed my eyes. As she spoke, a sensation flared in my throat. It wasn't a smell yet, but it was a weight. I could feel the coolness. I could see the dark basement. You're doing it, she whispered. You're building the bridge. Over the next 2 weeks, the atelier became a battlefield. Sophie took over the tiers of essential oils. She ignored the expensive synthetics. Instead, she brought in rusted iron nails, overripe peaches, sweat-soaked leather, and jars of rain. Paris, in the first, smells like expensive perfume, hiding a dirty secret, she would say. But the 20th? That smells like cheap tobacco and the hope of an immigrant. You have to put that into the collection. Not just pine. No one wants to smell like a tree. They want to smell like the feeling of coming home. I found myself watching her move with a strange, clumsy elegance. She was so unapologetically present that my own existence felt like a monochrome film. I was the heiress to a legacy of glass, but I felt like I was made of the things she brought in. Something fragile, something beginning to crack. One evening, the pressure of the board meeting felt like a physical weight. I was sitting on the floor, something I hadn't done since I was a child, surrounded by open vials. Sophie was across from me, a jar of mint between us. "I'm scared, Sophie," I admitted, not of losing the company, but of staying like this. "If you leave, I'll go back to being a ghost." Sophie didn't take my hand. She placed her fingers against my temple, where my pulse thrummed. "You aren't a ghost, Camille. You're just a poem that hasn't been read out loud yet." She leaned in, her face inches from mine. I could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Close your eyes," she whispered. "Imagine a white silk dress in a cedar chest for 50 years. It's dusty, but it carries the ghostly scent of the woman who wore it to her wedding. It's a memory that hurts to touch." I felt a sharp tingle at the bridge of my nose, a spark of light in a dark room. It wasn't cedar, but it was the ache of it, the nostalgia. "I see it," I whispered, a tear escaping. "She's waiting in an autumn garden for someone who isn't coming. The air is sharp, like a knife made of ice. That's the heart of winter's breath," Sophie said, her hand still against my temple. "It's not about the weather. It's about the longing." I realized then that I didn't just need Sophie's nose. I needed her fire. I needed the way she looked at a weed as if it were a miracle. But as the board meeting loomed, rumors circulated that I had lost my touch. If I failed, I wouldn't just lose my empire. I would lose the woman who taught me how to breathe again. The week before the exhibition was a descent into a beautiful, terrifying madness. The atelier, once a temple of sterile order, now looked like a botanical shipwreck. Petals of crushed jasmine littered the marble floor like fallen snow, and the air, according to Sophie's vivid narrations, was thick with the scent of impending thunder and stolen citrus. "They're watching us, Camille," Sophie whispered one night, as we stood over the final batch of winter's breath. She was right. My chief chemist, a man named Bertrand, who had served my father for decades, had begun lingering in the doorways. His eyes were cold, scanning the mess, the dirt under Sophie's fingernails, and the way I looked at her, not as an employer, but as a lifeline. The rumor mill was a hungry beast. The Ice Queen of Paris had hired a street florist, and the whispers said I had traded my legendary precision for a girl's whim. "Let them watch," I said, though my hands were shaking as I pipetted the bass note. "They see the chaos. They don't see the truth." But the truth was a fragile thing. As we worked, the distance between us vanished. We weren't just creating a fragrance. We were sharing a nervous system. Sophie would press a sprig of damp rosemary against my lips, and I would describe the color it made in my mind, a deep, bruised indigo. I would touch the silk of her neck, and she would tell me it smelled like the first light of dawn hitting a frozen lake. The intimacy was becoming a scent of its own, one I didn't need a nose to recognize. It was the smell of fear and desire, braided together like smoke. "Why are you doing this, Camille?" Sophie asked suddenly. We were in the small laboratory annex. The lights dimmed. She was leaning against a rack of crystal flacons, her copper curls glowing in the amber light. "You could have hired 100 experts. You could have faked it with chemistry. Why me?" I stepped closer, my white blazer casting a sharp shadow against the wall. "Because they would have given me perfection, and perfection is a lie. I've lived in perfection my whole life, Sophie. It's cold. It's empty. You gave me the dirt. You gave me the rot. You showed me that a rose is only beautiful because it's going to die. I reached out, my fingers hovering just an inch from her freckled cheek. I didn't hire a nose. I hired a soul. And now, I don't know how to exist without it. Sophie didn't pull away. Her breath hitched, and she closed the gap, her hand catching mine and pressing it against her face. Then don't. Stay in the mess with me. The moment was shattered by the sound of a glass vial breaking in the hallway. I spun around to see Bertrand retreating into the shadows, his face pale. He had seen us. More importantly, he had seen the way I wasn't smelling the ingredients. I was listening to her. The next morning, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. The Vane legacy is built on the nose of Paris. My uncle, the chairman, barked as I entered the boardroom. And yet, we hear reports that you are relying on a common street girl. We hear reports, Camille, that you cannot even distinguish between bergamot and floor cleaner without her whispering in your ear. The silence that followed was a vacuum. I stood at the head of the table, my spine a steel rod. I am creating the greatest work of my career. If you want a chemist, hire a machine. If you want a masterpiece, give me 5 more days. We will give you 48 hours, my uncle replied, his voice dripping with poison. A blind test. In front of the stockholders. You will identify 5 rare essences. If you fail, the board will move for an immediate transition of power. You will be removed, and the company will be sold. I walked out of that room feeling like a woman walking toward the guillotine. I found Sophie in the atelier, her eyes wide with worry. She knew. We can't do it, she whispered, her voice trembling. Camille, I can't whisper to you in front of them. It's over. No, I said, grabbing her shoulders. My blue eyes were no longer frozen. They were burning. We aren't going to fake it. We are going to do exactly what you taught me. We are going to memorize the texture. We are going to translate the feeling. You aren't going to be my nose, Sophie. You're going to be my heart. The next 48 hours were a blur of sensory overload. We didn't sleep. We stayed in the dark. And Sophie forced me to touch, taste, and hear the oils. She didn't use names. She used memories. Vial number 4 isn't vetiver, she told me, her voice a low hum in my ear. It's the feeling of walking barefoot across a damp lawn at midnight. It's heavy. It's gritty. It feels like the weight of a secret. Vial number 7 isn't sandalwood. It's the warmth of an old sun-baked stone in a monastery. It's dry. It's ancient. It feels like a prayer. I absorbed it all. I let her voice weave a map through the darkness of my mind. But as the sun began to rise on the day of the test, a new fear took hold. What if the link broke? What if, without her touch, the colors went gray again? Look at me, Sophie said, standing in the center of the ruins of our work. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, dried sprig of mint, the same one we had crushed on the floor that first night. I can't go in there with you, but take this. Whenever you feel the void, remember the rain. Remember the basement. Remember me. I took the mint, my fingers brushing hers. The contrast was still there, the heiress and the florist, but the lines were no longer clear. I was stained with her earth, and she was draped in my silk. As I walked toward the grand hall where the stockholders waited, Bertrand stopped me. He leaned in, smelling of stale coffee and malice. Enjoy your last hour, Mademoiselle Vane. A queen without a throne is just a girl in an expensive suit. A queen without a heart is just a statue, I replied, stepping past him, and I've finally learned how to bleed. I entered the hall. The lights were blinding. 5 glass jars sat on a pedestal. The board sat in the front row like judges at an execution. And in the very back, hidden in the shadows of the doorway, I saw a flash of copper curls and a green denim strap. Sophie was there. The world was silent. I reached into my pocket, gripped the dried mint, and waited for the first scent to rise. The hall was a cathedral of judgment. 300 people held their breath, their eyes fixed on the 5 glass jars like vultures circling a carcass. I stood on the stage, the spotlight a cruel white heat. My uncle sat in the front row, his watch ticking with a rhythmic metallic sneer. I felt the old terror rising, the gray hollow vacuum in my head, threatening to swallow the map Sophie had built. The first jar was opened. Bertrand, acting as the proctor, waved the glass wand beneath my nose. The void hit me first. Cold air. Nothing. I looked at the board, at their smirks. I felt my grip tighten on the dried mint in my pocket. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I wasn't in a hall. I was back in the atelier. I heard Sophie's low vibration, walking barefoot at midnight. Heavy, gritty. "This is vetiver," I said, my voice steady as stone. "From the roots of the earth. It feels like a secret kept in damp soil." The board exchanged a glance. Correct. The second jar. The third. I didn't identify them by their chemical names. I identified them by the stories they told. Every time my mind went blank, I reached for the memory of Sophie's skin, the way she described the sun hitting a monastery stone, the way she turned a molecule into a heartbeat. I wasn't guessing. I was feeling the architecture of the air. The 5th jar was the final test. It was a complex blend, a trap designed to trip even the most seasoned nose. Bertrand brought the wand to my face, a triumphant glint in his eyes. Nothing. My mind searched for the anchor, but this scent was unfamiliar. It was sharp, yet sweet. It was metallic, yet floral. I felt the panic clawing at my throat. The silence in the room began to roar. I looked toward the back of the hall, searching for those copper curls, but the shadows were too deep. I reached deep into my pocket, crushing the dried mint until it bit into my palm. Think, Camille. What would she say? I closed my eyes and stopped trying to find a name. I looked for the feeling. It felt like a broken mirror in a garden of violets. It felt like the sting of a slap followed by the warmth of a hug. It was a contradiction. It was a conflict. "This is not a single essence," I whispered, the microphone catching my breath. "This is an accord. It is the scent of a storm clearing over an orange grove. It is the bitterness of bergamot clashing with the metallic edge of aldehydes. It is the scent of an apology." The room was so silent you could hear the dust settle. Bertrand's hand trembled. My uncle's face turned a mottled purple. "Correct," my uncle spat, the word sounding like a curse. But I wasn't finished. I stepped away from the pedestal and looked directly at the stockholders. "For years, you have bought the Vane name because it promised perfection," I said, my voice rising. "But perfection is a tomb. I lost my sense of smell a year ago. I have been living in a world of glass and lies. I stand here today, not because I am a genius, but because I finally met someone who dared to show me the beauty of the rot." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. I saw Bertrand reach for his phone, likely calling the press. I didn't care. I am launching Winter's Breath, not as a product of chemistry, but as a product of connection. It is the first fragrance that doesn't smell like a status symbol. It smells like being alive. And if that makes me unfit to lead this company, then I am happy to leave the throne to the statues. I walked off the stage before they could respond. I didn't wait for the vote. I didn't wait for the applause or the condemnation. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and ran through the lobby, out into the Parisian afternoon. It was raining again. The city was a blur of slate and silver. I stood on the sidewalk, drenched in seconds, looking for her. And then I saw her. Sophie was leaning against a stone pillar, her green denim overalls soaked, her copper hair a wild, tangled mess. She was holding a single, fresh sprig of peppermint, her face wet with either rain or tears. I didn't stop. I threw myself into her arms, my expensive silk suit clashing with her earth-stained clothes. I buried my face in her neck. And for the first time in an eternity, I didn't need her to tell me what the world felt like. I did it, I whispered against her skin. I know, she breathed, her hands cupping my face. I felt it from the back of the room. I pulled back, looking into her green eyes. The world was still silent to my nose, but it was deafening to my heart. It doesn't matter if the smell never comes back, Sophie. I don't need to sniff the air to know who I am. I just need to be near you to know that the world is real. Sophie leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. You're getting mud on your silk, Camille. Let it stain, I replied, pulling her into a kiss that tasted of rain, mint, and the terrifying, beautiful scent of a new beginning. Behind us, the Vane Empire was in chaos. The press was swarming, the board was panicking, and the stock market was reacting to the scandal of the century. But as we walked away together, into the heart of the Marais, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't a glitch in the machine. I wasn't a ghost in a palace of glass. I was Camille Vane, and I could finally feel the rain.